Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The United States has cut all intelligence sharing to Ukraine, though officials imply that it could resume once peace talks over the conflict with Russia resume. Meanwhile, France is to host an EU defence meeting with a European peace proposal expected soon. US President Donald Trump issues a last warning to Hamas, ordering the release of Israeli hostages. Meanwhile, Hamas has confirmed that direct talks have been held with US officials over hostage releases, with Israel also being consulted. President Xi Jinping says that China is ready for any type of war with the US in response to the latest American tariffs. Trump says tariffs on Canadian and Mexican automakers will be paused for 1 month, while Macron slams expected EU duties. At least 15 people have been injured after a South Korean fighter jet accidentally drops 8 bombs on a civilian area. The South Korean Air Force says an investigation is underway as 2 people remain in a serious condition. A South Korean Air Force KF-16 fighter jet accidentally released multiple bombs over a civilian area during a training exercise in Pocheon, a town northeast of Seoul. The incident occurred around 10 a.m. local time when bombs landed outside the designated military range. At least 15 people were injured, including 2 in serious condition. A church and 6 other buildings sustained significant damage. The South Korean Air Force has issued a formal apology, expressing regret for the intended release. Authorities have relaunched an investigation to determine the cause of the malfunction as concerns grow over military training near civilian areas. This mishap comes just days before the annual Freedom Shield drills, a joint military exercise between South Korea and the United States. Officials have assured the public that safety measures will be reviewed to prevent similar incidents in the future. We are joined by 2 people for further discussion on this story. Seojin Yoon, journalist from Busan, South Korea, and was also joined by Professor Madhav Nalaput, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Thank you very much for joining us. Madhav Nalaput, I want to come to you first. How on earth does something like this happen?
Well, frankly, it's unfortunate, and the good luck is that it did not land in North Korea. Had that happened, the North Korean reaction is always hair trigger. Heaven knows what it would have provoked. So quite frankly, I'm quite surprised. These are high-precision aircraft carrying high-precision munitions. They're pre-programmed to land where the pilots want the bombs to fall. And landing in a civilian area is completely off base. As I said, the good news, if there's any good news out of this terrible incident, is the reality that had it been on the North Korean border, quite a lot of flights take place on that border, and had the bomb landed by accident across the DMZ, well, that would have created a very, very bad situation. So, I mean, we have escaped that. We have escaped that just very narrowly,
Yes.
but this is absolutely intolerable. And whoever is responsible down the chain of command needs to be basically cashiered. This is not a simple warning or an explanation. This is something which, in my view, calls for dismissal.
Yes, Seojin Yoon, I want to come to you next. Thank you very much for joining us. What are people saying about this accident in South Korea, and what key factors led to this accidental dropping on bombs in a civilian area?
I think it's not hard for the public to not question the basic safety checks and management systems. So we absolutely need a thorough investigation. That's what all the public is now thinking about, and to figure out what happened. And we also need to reassess this, like how victims are supported during training.
Yes, Madhav Nalaput, I want to come back to you. do you think the military? How do you think the military can respond to this incident, and what measures can be taken in the future to prevent things like this happening?
Look, we have a very unfortunate situation in South Korea, which is a very, very important country. It's not only a highly developed country, it's one of the linchpins of defense of the democracies in the Indo-Pacific. And very frankly, you have a situation where you have an elected president who's under trial now and is probably going to be impeached, and he was arrested. Now, in South Korea, unfortunately, there's a history of ex-presidents being sent to prison. And now you have an example of a sitting president in danger of, he's already been sent to prison, of remaining in prison. And in my view, what Yoon committed was wrong, but in 6 hours he rectified it, and no real damage was done. So I don't believe that an elected president deserves this kind of trial and this kind of fate. So frankly, South Korea, the system is a little bit in flux now. There is really no effective president, and the president has vast powers in South Korea. So that's a huge problem which the country is facing. But having said all that, it's very important the military bring to book, identify and bring to book whatever has gone wrong and cashier those who are responsible.
Yes, yes. Seojin Yoon, how might this affect how might this accident affect the public trust in South Korea's military operations?
Like I said, this is not a good sign for the public, of course. And so it's hard for the public to not question the basic safety checks. And so I think we need more thorough readiness and claim that joint military exercise with the US should be more prepared. And these irresponsible measures should be addressed and should be properly addressed.
Yes. Seojin, do you think this accident could be exploited possibly by North Korea for maybe propaganda purposes?
Yes, this accident could potentially be exploited by North Korea for propaganda purposes, like they might use it to criticize South Korea's military readiness or claim that the joint military exercise with the US are dangerous and irresponsible.
Yes. Professor Madhav Nalapat, how can we move forward from this? How can South Korea, is obviously consumed in this political crisis as well. The chain of command, there needs to be an investigation over this, and we need to figure out how to do that. What more can you say about this accident that has happened?
Look, all I can say is that South Korea has real enemies. It's got the North Korean regime, which is, to put it mildly, no friend of the South Korean regime. And President Yoon was very straightforward. In fact, he was possibly the first South Korean president in my memory who had the courage to stand up and along with Japan and say, yes, the Japanese are our partners in security, which is a fact. It's been an unfortunate history between the valiant Korean people and Japan, but the fact is that was history. Today, the situation is quite different. So he was very emphatic on that, and he was very clear on the need for a strong stand on the new threat in the Indo-Pacific, and that threat is China. So
yes.
That being the case, I'm a little worried about exactly how this entire process rolled out, and this vacuum is being exploited by people, and we don't know if it was an act of deliberate sabotage, if there was some deliberate sabotage of some guidance systems or something else. But all I'm saying is that a thorough investigation does need to be carried out, because the South Koreans are very good in technology. They are, in fact, leading the world in a lot of technology. Their companies are leading the world in technology. So this happening is completely beyond the realm of understanding. So the possibility of sabotage, the possibility of something like that happening cannot be ruled out.
Seojin Yoon and Professor Madhav Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us. We now move on to some more stories. In a significant escalation of trade tensions, President Donald Trump has imposed new tariffs affecting major US trading partners. Effective from March the 4th, these measures include a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Mexico and Canada, and an additional 10% tariff on Chinese products. The administration justifies these actions as efforts to protect American industries and address national security concerns. However, these tariffs have sparked immediate backlash. China has issued a stern warning stating it is prepared for any type of war in response to the US's actions. On a positive note, President Trump has granted US automakers a 1-month exemption from the 25% tariffs from Mexico and Canada, providing temporary relief to the automotive industry. As the situation develops, consumers and businesses alike are bracing for potential price hikes and economic uncertainty. The full impact of these tariffs will unfold in the coming months, influencing both domestic markets and international relations. We are joined by two guests for this discussion, Gerard Alfil and Professor Madhav Nalapat. Gerard, I wanted to come to you first. One of the highlights of this story that really makes it stick to mind is President Xi Jinping's language, referencing that China is ready for any type of war. What does this imply about Beijing's view of the dispute, and why might China use such forceful language?
Thank you. Yes, I think the meal is cooked at a hotter temperature than it is eaten. China wants to remind President Trump to think of the rhetorics and to calm things down. As you mentioned earlier in the news, when you read the news, that the tariffs for China are 10% compared to 25% in Canada and Mexico. So that's already lower than it was anticipated, and it was announced already by President Trump during the election campaign. By the way, I'm regularly in China as a businessman and marketing manager here based in Dubai. And the respect for President Trump, Telampu, as they call him in Mandarin, is still very high. They buy his books and they respect him as a businessman. So I would say this rhetoric, this type of language, what you say, any kind of war is. So let's get back to the diplomatic language and let's calm things down, because they say we notice how you speak in public, and we are ready for any kind of war. Does not mean that we are want to escalate in the dispute or the war of words, but to remind him to get back to diplomacy.
Professor Madhav Nalapat, how do you think China is going to aim to reassure its domestic audience about the country's economic growth and amid fears of this trade war? And why is that reassurance important for the Chinese leaders and people?
Look, the fact of the matter is that China has been pretty, I quite agree with the speaker just now, that they're extremely good hosts, and as a people they're very friendly and they're very charming. But the reality is that China is basically controlled by the General Secretary of the CCP and about 10 or 20 people around him, and nobody else has much of a say. Now the problem is it's been very aggressive in pursuing its interests. Now it's been talking. It says that the entire South China Sea belongs to China, which is absolute nonsense. If anything, it belongs to the ASEAN countries. It has tried to do a land grab in India. This time around in Galwan, it failed at cost in human lives to us and cost in human lives to the Chinese side. So this aggressive behavior is a problem. And what President Trump is doing is trying to decouple from Ukraine and decouple from the fixation on Ukraine that the European countries have got and move on to Asia, where the real problems is there and where the economies are moving much faster, and the Indo-Pacific. So this is the era where the Indo-Pacific is a central theater. And let's be honest, China is central in that theater, and China, by all the studies I have seen, regards itself as an adversary of the United States. But this kind of very open language, in my view, we can't just dismiss it. We have to take it seriously, and we have to ensure that our defenses are also developed sufficiently.
Gerard Al-Fil, how does China attempt to distinguish its global role from that of the US, especially given this ongoing trade war or possible trade war?
Well, just last year, China celebrated, and also many countries celebrated, the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, Idai Ilu in Mandarin. And I'm here in Dubai, for example. The UAE is now, China is now the first trading partner of the UAE, $79 billion bilateral exchange last year. When I moved to Dubai, I'm from Germany originally. When I moved to Dubai in 2004, China was not even in the top 5. The top countries were US, UK, and India. Now China is the top trading partner. That's also a result of the New Silk Road policy. And also Chairman Xi describes it in his book, The Governance of China, that the Belt and Road Initiative is a cornerstone, a main pillar of his policy. So if you want to know about AI and self-driving cars, you have to read Elon Musk today. If you want to know the future of China and Belt and Road, you have to read Xi Jinping's thoughts in the governance of China. So here's one distinguished point. I wouldn't say that there has no one else to say than the CCP in China. There's now the 2 sessions going on, the National People Congress and the consultative body in Beijing. The Chinese citizen can very much express their feelings and boycott goods, but that's what they don't do. I haven't seen any youngster or any consumer in China who says, I don't buy Apple anymore, I don't buy Nike shoes anymore because I disagree now with American policy. So that can distinguish this very well. And by the way, the Xinhua bookshops in China, they also sell the books like The Art of the Deal of President Trump, Telampu, as I said, in Mandarin. So they can distinguish very much here. And China distinguishes itself from other countries that they can distinguish between politics and business. And also many business people here from India, here in Dubai, the NRIs, the non-resident Indians, they do trade. They always say business is business. We do not listen to a politic back noise.
Yes, Professor Madhav Nalaput, and I wanted to move on to these this pause on automobile tariffs that Trump has announced, which is going to extend for an extra month. Why has Trump done this, especially for the automobile industry?
Well, actually, the previous speaker, and he has given a very logical summary of the situation. China does want to separate what it does on the borders, what it does on the sea borders, the land borders, air borders from trade. And it wants trade to go on undisturbed, irrespective of what it does. And I mean, we have a very large trade deficit with China. And I think, some of the NRIs that have been spoken about would probably have contributed to that huge deficit. The United States has a far bigger deficit from China. And the problem is today, in whether it is unconventional warfare that is getting into the internet space and sending messages designed to create social disharmony, or whether it is kinetic war, technology is front and center. So there's a huge race between the US and China to ensure leadership in technology. And for quite some time, it looked as though the US was losing the race. And now all kinds of barriers have been put on Chinese tech, including by India. We were the first to ban TikTok, and it's not yet been banned. If you look at TikTok, then the content on TikTok is very different from the Chinese version of TikTok, which is Douyin.
Yes.
That is socially quite harmonious, and TikTok content can promote a lot of violent activity, a lot of risky activity, especially on the part of youth. So, quite frankly, let's be honest, we are in a hybrid war, which could turn kinetic at any moment, and which is what explains Trump's, frankly, one, focus on reviving manufacturing. Because if a kinetic conflict comes, manufacturing at home is very important, something the government of India has recognized by its Make in India policy. And secondly, delinking the trade from this kind of activity is not possible. You can trade with friends, but you cannot trade with those who regard themselves as your adversary.
I just want to bring Gerard Alfiel in for one final question. How might these shared experiences of US tariffs encourage maybe Mexico, China, and Canada to explore new trade partnerships or agreements?
Well, China is doing trade with everyone in the world, but I don't think that they use this now as a leverage or try to say we form a kind of union or alliance against the US. Because, as I said, Belt and Road Initiative is supported by more than 100 countries. Also in West Africa, where I go, I see the support of Belt and Road Initiative. But I wouldn't now expect an alliance here. Rather, China will try now to expand Belt and Road and also to encourage other countries to join. And I think the diplomacy will be high on the agenda in the coming years to mitigate any kind of losses it might get from the tariffs from President Trump. But I want to quote the People's Daily from today, and they say something interesting. People's Daily, the biggest Chinese daily and biggest daily in the world, by the way. They quote the Yale Budget Lab, a research think tank in the US, and they say the tariffs will lead to 1% inflation rise in the US. So the People's Daily quotes a think tank in the US and says tariffs will backfire to the US. Lower inflation is what President Trump has promised in the election campaign, but the tariffs will backfire, will lead to higher inflation. So we're living in exciting times, I agree, and the next months will be quite interesting to watch.
Gerard Alfiel and Professor Madhav Nalaput, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. The Trump administration has reportedly held secret talks with Hamas in Doha over the release of hostages. After the talks, President Trump warned of more destruction in Gaza if hostages aren't freed. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council met over fears of a looming food shortage in Gaza. Here is a full update.
The Trump administration has reportedly engaged in confidential negotiations with Hamas regarding the possible release of US hostages held in Gaza. The discussions, which mark a historic first for the US, were held in Doha over the past few weeks by Adam Boehler, the US presidential envoy for hostage affairs.
Well, when it comes to the negotiations that you're referring to, first of all, the special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter.
Fresh out of the discussions, US President addressed strong statements to Hamas. Trump threatened further destruction of Gaza if all remaining hostages are not released and issued an ultimatum to Hamas leaders to flee. Taking to Truth Social, he posted, "Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it is over for you." He continued, also to the people of Gaza, "A beautiful future awaits, but not if you hold hostages. If you do, you are dead. Make a smart decision." On the other hand, the United Nations Security Council held consultations in a closed session on Wednesday morning as the global body has warned of an impending food shortage in the Gaza Strip. Palestinians in Gaza are going hungry as Israel's blockade causes high prices and food shortages, with the World Food Programme warning its stocks could run out in less than 2 weeks. In a separate development, Lieutenant General Al-Zamir replaces Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi as Israel's military chief after the October 7th Hamas attack. Netanyahu reaffirmed Israel's goal of total victory, while Halevi called for an independent inquiry into security lapses. Bureau Report, NewsX World.
Let's now take a look at some news updates coming in from across Europe. Britain strongly condemned the sentencing of UK national James Anderson to 19 years in prison by a Russian court, which accused him of having fought for the Ukrainian army. "We strongly condemn the sentencing of James Anderson, a British national, in a Russian court on false charges," said a spokesperson for the Foreign Office. The Vatican appears to have modified its stance on gender-affirming surgery and gender theory last year. Recently, the Vatican published a speech by Doctrine Chief Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, in which he stated that there are cases outside the norm, such as strong dysphorias that can lead to unbearable existence, or even suicide. These exceptional situations must be evaluated with great care. A UK-Ireland summit marks a significant reset in relations between the two governments in the post-Brexit era, according to Irish PM Michelle Martin. Martin met with Keir Starmer ahead of the summit, where cabinet members from both countries will participate in Liverpool. As part of the summit, Ireland will announce new investments into the UK worth £185.5 million, which the UK government says could create more than 2,500 jobs across the country. Protesters launched gasoline bombs and fireworks in clashes with police outside Greece's parliament during renewed nationwide protests demanding accountability for the 2023 rail disaster that claimed 57 lives. The violent clashes occurred hours after opposition parties presented a no-confidence motion against Greece's centre-right government in parliament. A vote on the motion is expected late on Friday. Europe's climate monitor stated that global sea ice cover has hit a historic low in February, with temperatures near the North Pole spiking up to 11 degrees Celsius above average. Scientists warn that this period may be the warmest the Earth has been in the past 125,000 years. And that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.